It's week 2 and I'm on campus. Hi everyone, welcome to the week 2 feedback video for SOC 712. Okay, I'm outside the past building and we are a go for this term. So we did our first week, kind of introducing you again, reintroducing you, getting you back into research methods. Yeah, we talked about kind of various ways of approaching research, ways that you can, do empirical research, different ways you can be involved in the research process as a researcher, either more as an outsider or as more of an insider. So just kind of looking at the general ideas behind social scientific inquiry. And so this video is all about giving you feedback on week 2, on what you guys did, the mini lectures, the discussion posts, and to push the discussion a little bit further along. And so the idea is that you listen to this at the beginning of the following week, and then kind of utilize the feedback to help you improve, and just to keep you thinking some more about different ways of doing research in sociology and legal studies now that you're at the MA or PhD levels. Okay, so I've got my notes here. If you're wondering why I look down once in a while, this is reminding my script what I'm meant to say. Prompts. I'm walking along Ring Road, and so you'll hear a few cars behind me. You'll see a few students. You'll see campus. And then the idea is, throughout the term, week to week, I'll do one of these videos each week, and I'll take you guys around different areas of Kitchener-Waterloo while I give you the feedback. And so for the mini lectures and discussion posts, you have your own individual feedback that I've put up in Learn. So for the mini lectures, that's in Dropbox in Learn. On the discussion posts, that's in replies to your discussion posts. So you have the individual feedback, always, again, within mind of how you can improve for future weeks. If you did lose points, where were they lost? That sort of thing. But overall, the mini lectures and discussion posts went very well, very successful for the first week. So keep at it. Seems to be going well so far. And then, this video is kind of general feedback for everyone, and me kind of giving my 2 cents, my thoughts, and pushing the discussion a bit further after I've kind of graded your week 2 mini lectures and discussion posts. So specifically for the mini lectures, like I mentioned, your individual feedback is now in Dropbox, so you can go and have a look. I'm going to be updating, hopefully updating the grades for the mini lectures week to week. And so what you see out of 25 so far in Dropbox is your grade for the first week, for week 2. And then as we go on, I'll calculate the average of your top 8, and I'll update that grade in Dropbox as we go. So other thing I've done is I've also picked my top 3 mini lectures of the week and posted them on Learn under Content Week 2, kind of top 3 mini lecture videos. And these were videos I found were especially successful. I had a lot of great ones to choose from, lots of great mini lecture videos this term. And I'll try and kind of do the round of most students, for all students, to get on that top 3 list week to week. These top 3 were kind of different topics, 3 different topics, mini lecture topics for the week, and using a format that I felt was especially engaging in terms of kind of how the material was presented, and different styles of presentation as well, some using slides, some using audio, that sort of thing. So go and have a look. And also, if you're still kind of learning this material, if it's newer to you, or you're just curious, want to see what kind of these good quality mini lectures look like, go and have a watch. And again, on Learn, you never have to download videos, right? You can stream them directly in Learn. So you just click on them and stream them in Learn, and you can watch them there. Okay. Just a reminder what makes a good mini lecture, because we're at the kind of start of the term. I mentioned this in the course requirements video, but it's worth saying again. I feel the best quality mini lectures are those that, obviously do a good job of presenting the key concepts and ideas of the topic for that week within that 5 to 10 minute time frame that I'm giving you. Usually you should be using most of those 10 minutes to give the level of detail I'm looking for. And so you're explaining it in a clear, kind of concise manner, covering all the key elements to that topic for, again, a non-expert or undergrad audience if you want. And one of the ways of clarifying ideas and of concepts, the best way is obviously to provide examples. So examples of social scientific studies, some kind of cool example that you think is helpful to understand. And it can be kind of a few key examples throughout the mini lecture, not too many obviously, it's a short lecture, or just one big overall example at the end, that works. What kind of other things? The example is really to show how do you put these things into practice, because in social sciences we use a lot of jargon, like in any discipline, to be honest. But for a beginner, that's intimidating, right? So kind of you talk about some of these key concepts and ideas, you explain them, and then with the example you show practically what does that actually entail, right? Another way of kind of engaging students, examples are helpful to keep their attention, to keep them engaged, but also sometimes a little activity is fun too. I mean, it's kind of weird format for the little activity, but I've seen some students end mini lectures with like, and here's a little activity you guys can try at home kind of thing. So that's another way of engaging them. It's not necessary, but it's a possibility. And so, yeah, so I felt those were kind of, the best mini lectures that really help people develop their kind of learning and skills in a very short time frame, right, is what we're aiming for. And that, like I said, the reason I'm giving you guys 5 to 10 minutes is not because I'm cruel, but because that's often how much time in an undergrad class we would have to present one key subtopic for a mini lecture that week, right? So there you go. But overall, pretty successful, and look forward to watching many more throughout the course of this term. Now for the discussion posts, again, went very well. Had a really interesting discussion. Especially about your own approaches to research, how you guys do or are thinking of doing research, the advantages and drawbacks of having that kind of more insider praxis approach versus a kind of more outsider, quote unquote, objective approach, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. And I'm not here, the point wasn't to say like one is better than the other. It's not. We see all sorts across the disciplines of sociology and legal studies, including in our own department for that matter. I'll talk a bit about my approach in a few minutes. But just to kind of give you a sense of what's out there and to start getting you thinking about your own way of doing, right? Because you've probably done this without maybe much thought before, but it's worth taking a moment to reflect about kind of what is your own approach, what do you want to aim for, what kind of social sciences do you want to do, and to be able to articulate that and discuss it. And so that when someone asks you, or you have to defend that approach in a journal article or at a conference, you're ready and you're already thinking about it. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, for each of your discussion posts, I've replied to each of them with my feedback. Again, the feedback is usually relatively short, but kind of indicates maybe if you did lose points or what you could improve for future weeks. Or things that like I'm just still wondering about myself. I'll just ask like some random question tied to the discussion. And some of you had started your own threads on the discussion post. Some of you had replied to other students in the discussion board. That's totally cool. Either way works for me. Some of you were wondering about that, about kind of what was the best way to do it. Would you reply to other students? Do you start your own thread? Either or, it's kind of your own preference. If you want to respond directly to a student who already posted that week on the board, that's totally fine. Or if you want to start your own thread, the idea here is that you're always pushing discussion forward. So if you're replying, obviously, you're not repeating what the previous student said, you're pushing it forward, the discussion forward. And if you're starting your own thread, you're also not repeating what others have said before. You're just pushing the discussion forward with a new example, with tying in new material that hasn't been covered yet that week, that sort of thing. If you're curious, I am outside the Dana Porter Library. Here we are. Woo, this is where I'm at campus. Okay, we'll keep going. Some of you felt the need to kind of summarize what students had already said when you posted, like, oh, so-and-so already said this, blah, blah, blah. You can do a bit of that, but don't spend much of your space on that. I'm reading all the posts at the same time, so I don't need a summary. Thank you. So you can go like straight into your new material and spend more of your space on more detail, kind of elucidating, examining, and further providing you more examples for that new material that you're covering in your own post. Okay. So, and I mean, Obviously, those of you who kind of posted at the start of the week struggled less with this, but there is always this struggle of like, well, how do I, if I'm one of the last people in the week to post, how do I make my post distinct, right? How do I actually provide answers that are new, that are pushing that discussion forward? I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. New examples, right? So if you feel that most of the content of the readings that help answer the discussion questions have already been addressed by then, we'll provide new examples. Tie in material from previous weeks. Obviously, this week wasn't possible. It was our first week of material. But in future weeks, you can tie back into previous discussions and kind of reflect on that and push the material forward that way. Or obviously, if you feel there was certain aspects of the content that were not covered yet, that were in the readings, that were relevant for answering the discussion questions, or if you had a different view than previous students, that's another way to make your answer distinct, right? And obviously some of the discussion questions are more about your own research and your own way of doing. And I know a lot of you are kind of at the beginning of your careers. Maybe you haven't done a whole lot of research projects yet, which is totally cool. But then the idea is to kind of think of like, well, what would you like to be? Or maybe, when you've been at work, in a similar context where these skills matter as well, how did you apply it then, right? I've had a few examples of students who posted answers like that this week, and they're really interesting and really relevant. And so that's what I'm looking for in these discussion answers. Obviously, between 500 and 1,000 words, you should be using closer to the 1,000. We should be close to the 1,000 to, again, provide the level of detail that I'm looking for. And so a lot of my comments, especially this week as we get started, are along those lines in my replies to your posts. Okay, so now that I've talked about the main lectures, the discussion posts, obviously you'll get to be getting more feedback week to week on that. And if you have any questions about my feedback, about any of this, you're always welcome to come see me during my office hours, right? Tuesdays and Fridays, virtual or in person. But now I want to kind of get into a bit of my own epistemological approach to research and kind of my own stance on that, right? Because many of you shared your own stance. That was really fascinating. And I want to share mine as well to add to the conversation. And again, this is not me saying there's only one right way of doing. There isn't. I'm never going to say that this term. There's lots of different ways of approaching the social sciences, doing research. And so this course is not about like, you have to absolutely do it this way and there's no other good way. That's not me, right? And that's, to be honest, not the reality either. In the social sciences, there's lots of diversity of approaches to doing research. And so I just kind of want to share with you my own, just so you get to know me a bit better, my own research, and to kind of give you an idea from someone who has had to have thought about it a lot over the years in courses, but also, when I actually conduct research projects later in my career. And so, yeah, I often, when people ask me, I call my epistemological stance in sociology as one of kind of soft positivism, right? Many of you know I'm a quant expert, right? My real expertise is in statistics, even though I'm very familiar with qualitative methods as well. And that positivism, a kind of more Merton approach, if you will, from the readings of this week, that is typical of the more quant people. It's also where my training was, right? Some of this has to do, I'm crossing the street, so I'm looking both ways while I'm talking. A lot of your stance, even though obviously it is a choice and it's your own decision, it does often come from how we were trained as well, right? So I'm coming from maybe a more traditional sociological training in the sense of kind of seeing, considering Merton and those old guys as the big names, the ways of doing sociology research. Obviously with a grain of salt, I'm aware of everything that's come since in terms of research methods as well. But I still have that kind of what I call soft positivism, not pure positivism, soft positivism, because obviously I recognize that because of my background, because of where I'm coming from, the values I hold, the ways I do things, I'm not fully objective. No one can ever be 100% objective. That's not really a human thing, even though there's this ideal, especially in the natural sciences. And I think I mentioned that in one of the answers to the discussion post this week, was that even in the natural sciences, they claim objectivity. They're not objective. Their backgrounds, their values come into focus, depending on what they want to focus their research on, the types of questions they ask, and even the way they interpret some of their data is obviously impacted by them. So I'm aware of that. And being aware of that is important, But at the same time, I also want to strive to be as objective as I can, right? Knowing that it's an ongoing battle and it'll never be won, but that it should still be this ideal that we strive for in research, so that, you know, I'm not tainting the data too much with my own views, with my own ways of doing, but that hopefully I can stay open to different ways of doing, because they are out there, right? And this week there was a great discussion on the week 2 board about kind of the advantages and drawbacks of that, right? And that's really valid discussion. I'm glad we had it, worth going over and reading again. If you guys haven't read the posts from week 2, really insightful and hopefully really helpful for your own research. And so it's all there, so please go and read it if you can. And yeah, so it's kind of something that I think about a lot, but it is something that I'm kind of still strive for, right? And you know, there's also the reason, like the kind of stance I have, it's tied to the quantitative methods, it's tied to my training, it's also tied to what I study, right? I study religion, spirituality, non-religion, and how it plays out in society, right? The impacts it has on society and the impacts that society has on them. And I don't consider those things a social problem, right? I don't necessarily consider them a social benefit either. They are just social phenomena that I'm really fascinated by and interested in. And because I don't consider them a social problem, I'm not looking to be actively involved in quote unquote solving the problem, right? And so I don't necessarily need to adopt what I would call a more praxis approach, where not only are you researching, but you're also putting that kind of what I called in the discussion question, the activist hat on, you're involved, you're engaged, you're helping resolve a problem. Whereas, for example, my colleagues who are studying things like sexual violence, violent crime, those sorts of things that we do clearly consider social problems, right? Inequalities, poverty. That requires sometimes a different stance, because we do consider them social problems, and so maybe we should be more involved, some of them are, in solving these issues, right? In improving policy to kind of help rid of them. Just like if you're studying something that you would consider a social benefit as something that's good, I don't know, like strong community ties that help individuals form a sense of identity and sense of self, well, maybe that's something that you want to understand how to replicate in other contexts to kind of replicate those social benefits. And so maybe you're more involved that way, right? And again, helping improve policy, but kind of more to reproduce the phenomenon rather than get rid of it. And so this is why we see diversity in approaches, right? But in my case, I'm just fascinated to understand how religion, spirituality, and non-religion works in their society, because in reality, there's not a whole lot of information about how that is, right? It's not something that a lot of sociologists focus on, and so it's not something we necessarily know a lot about, especially here in Canada. For example, that religion actually has a big impact on who people vote for in Canada. We talk a lot about it in the US, but we don't seem to talk about a whole lot here, but it is very much a thing. And so that's where my kind of soft positivist, usually outsider approach comes in, of kind of just observing, collecting certain data, in my case numerical, right, statistical, and then looking at the relationships, the associations that I find in there, and trying to kind of understand them through social theory. And when it comes to religion and spirituality, I'm very much an outsider. I'm not someone who's personally religious. If it's non-religion, I guess I'm more of an insider in that sense, when I'm studying it. But I do usually take a more outsider approach, and I own that, right? That's part of my way of doing, and I see real value in that, because as an outsider, sometimes I pick up on things that insiders don't notice as much. So, for example, right, like someone who's very involved in a church group might have a kind of very specific lens that they see things through, which is very valuable and should also be brought to the social sciences. And I do have colleagues who are quite religious themselves, and who bring that more insider perspective, who have that kind of deeper understanding of certain things from the inside. But I think it sometimes also takes an outsider to see kind of what these people miss sometimes, right? Like to bring in a different perspective. And that's also valuable. So I think we're actually in a really exciting time of the social sciences and sociology and legal studies, because we're actually during a time when there's a lot of people working in the field, even in a small subdiscipline like sociology of religion. And they're bringing a lot of different perspectives, different ways of doing, and that's actually bringing a lot of kind of different and hopefully complementary research questions, findings, data, right? And so I think that's actually the best case scenario, is that one way of doing always has strengths and limitations, and many of them were discussed, were on the discussion board of this week. But that together, when you kind of have these different approaches from different people, that actually kind of brings a more, robust, full understanding of the social phenomenon at study. And so, I think that's actually the best case scenario. So this is why, even though I have a more soft positivist approach, I'm totally cool with my kind of colleagues who do more critical sociology, more praxis sociology, maybe are using, in my field, a lot of kind of decolonization theories. That's the current one that's very popular amongst that crowd, and for good reason. And so I really enjoy that. I enjoy hearing their research, and I enjoy hearing how they do things, but also recognizing it's not how I do things. I bring a different perspective to the table that I hope is also valid, right? In my case, there's very few people who work with statistics on religion. I'm like one of like 3 or 4 people in the country. And so hopefully I can bring that, right, to the table, that actually the stats and the numbers can actually provide some helpful insight to get often like a more overview, a general picture of what's going on. So, and what's fun when you actually kind of get further along in your career, maybe not now as grad students, you're often kind of stuck just in terms of the time you have and the fact that you don't have much money or many resources. You often do one type of research, right? But when you get more advanced in your career like I am, the fun thing is you can bring together a research team, usually with a grant, of say 5, 10, 15 people, maybe even 20, who have these different perspectives and can actually bring a kind of diverse approach to the research question that you're asking for that project. And so that's something that I do a lot now. Like, I'm often a quant person with a team of a lot of qualitative folks who are bringing different perspectives, and I kind of bring the kind of soft positivist quant approach perspective with me. And so that's something, as you move forward, maybe on the job, or if you go into academia, you can start working in these bigger teams, and that's where you get really good quality, robust findings. You get them at grad school, in grad course, in your grad thesis, and your grad dissertations as well. But the advantage later on is that you can actually have these different complementary perspectives from a larger research team. So that's hopefully something that many of you can look forward to in the future, and that I'm enjoying at this stage of my career as an associate prof. Okay. So coming back to the readings for this week, the more kind of intermediate advanced readings of Ellingson and Merton. Obviously, I realize these 2 readings, they're not new. The point wasn't for them to be the most recent readings out there. They are the golden oldies, readings that are, from previous decades, but they're still very relevant today. Pretty much most of what's covered in both Ellingson and Merton is still very relevant for the research we do today. And I was kind of asking you in the discussion questions, are you kind of close to Ellingson? Are you close to Merton? We had lots of different answers. That was great. In my case, I'm closer to Merton, right? With the soft positivism. I was trained, Merton was like a key thinker in my training in sociology at the University of Ottawa, and then in Britain as well. And so he's kind of more my guy, if you want to think about like who are you closer to with the kind of more classic or kind of classic contemporary sociologists. So again, I don't ever believe that our research can be completely value-free. That's not really what we're aiming for. But I said that we are actually aiming for it. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Our research can never be fully value-free, but in my own approach, at least, I realize not everyone aims for this, but in my own approach, I do aim for it. It is what I strive for. And so, yeah, I'm crossing the creek over to the colleges. Here we're at the creek. I might turn around because they're cutting the grass on the other side. So here we are. Yeah, so like Martin actually believed you could be value-free and objective, and I guess that's where I would disagree with Merton. like, well, that's never really possible with humans. I mean, I never actually had a conversation with him, obviously, so maybe he was more nuanced. It was just the way he wrote it and the way we've interpreted since. But I mean, I do agree with him that's something we should strive for in terms of kind of mitigating some of the disadvantages of being too much of an insider and too involved in a topic, right? Because, you know, there are strengths. Many of you mentioned, you know, the Ellingson approach. You know, she opens up things from research participants that an outsider wouldn't be able to touch on and to delve into, because she has that empathy, she has that shared experience with them. But there's also some disadvantages to that. You know, if your research participants think that you're expecting something from them, they will give it to you, whether it's true or not. And what I mean by that is, if you have a shared experience and you're sharing that experience, the research participant is more likely, say in an interview or a focus group, even in a survey, to kind of give you the answers you want to hear. So either they don't want to hurt your feelings, say if they had a different experience from you, of, you know, in the case of Ellingson, having cancer or going through the medical system, say their experience was different, well, they're less likely to share that with you. If you've kind of given your own experience, like, hey, this is how I feel, because they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they don't want to, like, I don't know, anger you in some way, or be seen themselves as illegitimate somehow because they don't have the same experience as you. Or maybe more subtly, the thing that you decide to focus on when you share your experience with them will kind of get them to focus on that same thing, and maybe not on something else that they might have shared otherwise, right? So if you're talking about how much, I don't know, the doctors are being cold with you, and how much it's a dehumanizing experience going through some of these cancer tests and treatments, well, maybe they'll kind of focus on that rather than, you know, something else they might have shared otherwise. And so it often influences the type of data you have. Obviously, everything we do influences the type of data we have, the types of survey questions we ask, the types of way we approach an interview, the words we use in an interview as researchers when asking people about things. But it's important to realize there's also some drawbacks to the kind of more insider Ellingson approach, if you want. And that's okay, like everything has strengths and weaknesses, but it's kind of, I prefer to avoid those limitations and kind of just get people to give me information, hopefully in a way that's more reflective of what they're thinking and what they're doing and their attitudes. It's not perfect, it's something I keep working on, but it's something I strive for and will continue to strive for until I retire. Just going through my notes here. You know, and it's important to keep in mind that not everyone is quite as lenient or conciliatory as I am when it comes to this variety of approaches and how we use them in a complementary way. I have literally seen fistfights break out at conferences. It's usually not this bad, but yeah, at conferences, because people had a different approach and were really convinced that their own approach was the best and only way of doing. And so you will come across certain individuals, hopefully less in our department, but, you know, overall around, who strongly feel that their way of doing is the only way of doing. I find that unfortunate, and I also find it a bit naive and maybe not as complex of an understanding as research methods as they should have. But you should be aware of it, right? And maybe you also have that feeling, and if that's the case, I would say be a bit more open, right? Because there are different ways of doing, and there's reasons there's different ways of doing, right? Because different ways of doing kind of complement each other and cover off each other's strengths and weaknesses, right? And so keep that in mind, and be aware that not everyone is as open to that diversity of approaches as I am. But I really did want to get across to you that I am open to it this term. So even if you have an approach, a stance that's very different from my own, which many of you do, I am totally cool with that, and you go for it. The idea that I want you to kind of work on this term is to figure out what is your stance and approach, your way of doing, and kind of better understand it, develop it with further readings, see how others have done it before, and kind of what best suits your own research design, your own research focus, your own research topic, and also your own, style and training and what you want to do in terms of working in the social sciences. And so, yeah, that's kind of the main message I want to get across. I want to share with you my own approach, but also to kind of make sure that you are clear that your approach, even if it's very different from mine, which it probably is totally cool. And I'm open to that, and I'm cool with those who have a stance that's closer to mine or that's very different from mine, and just kind of be aware of the strengths and limitations of your way of doing, right? And so again, that you can discuss them, talk through them, maybe think about them sometimes, of some of the kind of strengths and limits of your own research, because all research has its kind of advantages and drawbacks, what your findings are showing, what they're not showing, what you were able to capture very well in your research, what you were not able to capture very well, that sort of thing, right? And so that's what you should be thinking about all the time when you do research, and that's a sign of good quality research, right? Because no research is perfect. No research has no limitations. No findings is like all-encompassing and final. That's not how it works. Someone who has a good understanding of research methods will always understand the kind of advantages and drawbacks of doing research a certain way, and then picks the research approach or design that best suits, that can best help them answer their own research question, right? That's what we do in empirical research in general. Yeah, okay. So that's kind of pretty much all I had to say on the theme or the topic of this week, the kind of beginner, getting us back into ways of thinking about doing research. One thing I did want to mention is I am gonna organize like a happy hour kind of in person at the grad house sometime for the end of September around. So I will send out a doodle poll this week to everyone by email to see who would like to come to that, what your availabilities are, so that I can hopefully pick a time and day where as many of you as I can get who want to go to the happy hour can actually make it. So I'll try and pick the time that works for the most of us. It'll be like again, happy hour kind of end of day sort of thing at the grad house. And the idea of the happy hour, there's nothing essential for the courses we have covered there, obviously, so it's not mandatory in any way. But it's just kind of a nice way to socialize, get to know you all, see each other in person, some of you at least, because it's an online course we might not get to in a regular class. And I just, obviously if you have stuff you want to discuss about the themes of the course, that's cool, or anything else, grad life in general. You want to hear some gossip from the department, I'm usually pretty good at that. And so we're going to have a nice happy hour and just a fun time at the grad house. If you haven't been, it's like a little pub that has decent drinks and food on campus at decent prices. And so, yeah, I'll send out a doodle poll and email for that. So keep an eye out for that this week. And then, yeah, the idea is that you work on the week 3 materials, and then I will grade them as usually, hopefully usually the grades for the main lectures and discussion posts show up around the kind of Monday to Tuesday mark of the following week. And then I'll, make one of these videos again to give you more feedback for the week 3 material. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our first little feedback video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Okay, we've got our post-credit wildlife scene. The campus mascots, Canada geese, just hanging out, eating the grass while she's still green. Hey? Yeah, totally cool with humans, mostly. Not gonna attack me because it's not nesting season. All right. Okay, guys, you're officially our post-credit scene. Thanks, everyone. Bye.